Hey, this is Trav here, and just a quick reminder that this podcast relies on the kindness of my Patreons, and I would like to thank the following people: Bill, Brendan, Grant, Lisa, Mog, Dan, and Paula. Your constant monthly donation really helps out, and if you can spare $1, the link to my Patreon is in the description. Anyway, thanks for listening. Here's the show. Hey, welcome to episode 167 of Tales from the Mind Boat, the slow-moving boat ride inside the relaxing, pristine waters of my mind. This is Trav Nash speaking, and thank you very much for listening to this episode. I really do appreciate it. On today's show is two brief reflections in different stages of life. One about the changing season of autumn and the golden light, and the next story is about a haircut and how changing your hair doesn't necessarily mean changing your life for the better. So it's a good show, and all you need to do is sit back, relax, think about the weekend as we set sail. On a crisp autumn Tuesday morning, the sky looked like the night was doing battle with the day. Ink-block clouds stretched themselves thin and devoured those small holes in the sky where the morning sun made its slow climb in the middle of the sky before it rolled back down beyond the horizon again. The golden light that broke through made everything look as if it was all painted in radiant light and glitter. Fine details that you would have never noticed before became striking and glistened while it could, before the dark clouds cast shadows over the world again, until that golden light found a way to break through. The autumn chill had turned the leaves that lined the suburban streets into a collage of oranges, reds, and yellows. Leaves gently found the courage to let the wind detach its thin connection to the tree that birthed its existence, and gracefully rode gravity back down to earth, joining clusters of other leaves on the nature strip and in the rained-out gutters. The sound of petrol-fueled engines go off almost in sync with one another, and suddenly every footpath has someone in high-visibility fluoro vests, a dust mask, and a leaf blower in hand that extended from a motorized backpack. They look like some kind of low-rent cyborg ninja in a B-grade Canon film from the early 80s. They blow these leaves off people's driveways and around their seaside property lines into mounds of soggy leaves. Another person comes in to collect these mounds and dispose of them in the back of their trucks in green tie-up garbage bags. And I wonder why I was so obsessed with hiding the fact that things pass away and die right in front of us. And when they do, we want them quickly and efficiently out of sight and out of mind. The overkill of using industrial leaf blowers to remove the dead leaves away from our little self-designated comfort zones maybe is a sign we are not ready to wake up from the daydream just yet. We need just a little bit longer until we have to deal with the fact that nothing is really forever. Somewhere further away, tiny pockets of air lifts leaves off the wet grass and spin them into spin cycles, making tiny tornadoes of dead leaves and speckles of rubble from the road. They blow across the street and sometimes intersect with other mini tornadoes, melding together to form one big mishmash blender of red and orange leaves from different trees found on different streets that may have never met one another until their very end. Dark clouds now conquered the sky, and tiny raindrops fell from those clouds and made tiny ripples and puddles around cement pathways that has now been raised and cracked under the strain of the restless earth it was poured upon. Ducks descended from the biro-inked skies and stretched their vast wings out in pre-rehearsed formations as they came skidding into the canal and pulled their wings back into themselves and let the strong current that is returning to the ocean take them wherever it will eventually end up. The world turned grey and the streets became empty and lonely as people had already thrown their expensive jackets over their expensive haircuts to get out of the rain and back indoors, to where they can wait out this rain with a cup of coffee and whimsically look out a window at people like myself who strolled at their own pace in the rain, unaffected by this drastic change in weather. A magpie who had found one of the few remaining trees that still had enough leaves to shelter its feathers from the rain began to chortle to anyone who would listen to its unique composition that it has been working on its whole life. Cars sped through the rain-soaked streets as they made mad dashes to reach their destination before the sky fell down upon them. Something about any day that is not all blue skies and warm yellow suns seemed to frighten people. They will avoid it at any cost, and the lengths they will go to remove the dead leaves that scatter around their driveways and narrow paths that led to their fancy stained glass front doors. The rain began to thin out, and the dark clouds began to look more broken, tipped lead pencil shades of grey. Patches of the sky evaporated in white, illuminous midday sun, and soon the sun reclaimed its rightful claim to the day once more. As soon as this happened, people left the comfort of their coffee shops, bakeries, and pet accessory superstores to be out in the sun again. Like phones on 1% battery, people go out to be recharged and maintain their ability to multitask above and beyond their original design. Tribes of people all wearing outfits that look like they're ready to go out and do some fishing, walked in clusters and speak loudly about getting caught in the rain and how they could have died, which is probably a little overdramatic. One group of people discussed the previous federal election, and one lady mentioned that it didn't matter who he gave seats to, as they all lie and are all dishonest, and everyone around that woman agreed awkwardly, then said their goodbyes, and then everybody parted away from her. Maybe they were the very people who she didn't trust to begin with. Happy dogs trot through newly formed puddles on the concrete sidewalk, and the sound of leaf blower engines started up again until all you could hear was the loud mechanical drone that muffled any sound of the birds or the rustling trees that was shaking off more and more of its dead leaves with every passing gust of wind. A new horizon of dark clouds loomed ready to pounce just ahead of me over the ocean that is forever pushing waves inwards to crash over the rocks that hold up the boardwalk that barely holds on to the edges they attach to. The sun's time in the sky is once again running out of time, and rain may return again. Rain that will make people retreat back inside their homes and their day jobs. Rain that will be the topic of conversations of friends who meet up for lunch once a week and run out of things to talk about. Rain that will wash away those dead leaves into the gutter, that will fall into drains and be washed out into the sea with everything else we discard. Everything is a spin cycle. The give and take, the light and dark, the life and death, all trying to stake its claim to shake up our day and remind us there is no such thing as forever anymore. "You ruined my hair, and I will never forgive you," is something I have probably said to my mother on more than a few numerous occasions when she would cut the family hair on a Sunday night while the magical world of Disney played on the TV and the threat of another school day creeped closer with every passing minute I was asked to sit still and not move. I remember looking into the mirror after she had finished and seeing my hair looking like someone clipped on a brown piece of Lego hair upon my head. My dark brown hair was now evenly cut into a bowl-like shape that made me look like a Beatle fan, but not a legitimate Beatle fan, one of those weird trend-following kids who wasn't really into the Beatles, but didn't want to follow such an explosion of teen trends. This was the 80s, and having a Beatles haircut was no longer fab. Being only 8 at the time, I didn't know what I wanted, or even knew that there was a profession where people could cut strangers' hair. I assumed that all mothers cut their kids' hair, and just did a better job than mine. I believe my mum could probably do a better job, but purposely was trying to sabotage my already shaken status at my primary school. I was already that weird, overly emotional kid, and now I had this dorky haircut to go with my dorky secondhand clothes and my dorky secondhand personality. "Well, next time you can go to the hairdresser," my mum would snap at me, and I would respond with a snarky, "Good." But we both knew this was never going to happen, at least not for years from now. My hair would continue to grow at a stupidly fast rate, and every 3 months from now, we would be right back repeating this very scene once again, only slightly more fueled by my already rebellious teen angst with every birthday that came and went. I don't even know why I cared so much. I don't think how I looked was the problem, and honestly nobody really cared that much. I was already in the same class as most people in primary school that had already made up their minds on who was cool and who wasn't, and there was very little I could do to reset this fact. The only thing I could do was wait it out until I went to high school, and hopefully I could find a new group of people who would be less judgmental and accept me for whatever I was turning into. Regardless of what new retro 80s TV shows like Stranger Things would have you believe, few kids had perfect hair, and if they did, it was more than likely due to good genes than a personal stylist. I've seen a lot of kids around the place these days emulating that romantic idea of what the 80s style and fashion used to be, but to me it seems like they're cherry-picking the good things and blending them more into a contemporary trend. Few people want to bring back some of the more cringier fashion trends, like shoulder pads or huge permed hair, and black and white checkered patterns that were attached to green and pink fluoro tracksuits. Even the 90s wasn't all plaid shirts and Kool-Aid red unwashed hair. It was also shaved undercuts, middle parts, happy pants, and a lot of brand worship, where people would wear a complete outfit with corporate logos like Reebok, Adidas, and Fubu scribbled all over it. The fact that I lived in a family that couldn't afford to keep up with all these expensive waves of constantly changing fashions perhaps was the best thing that could have ever happened to me growing up. Without all these fashionable clothes and hairstyles to hide behind, I had to begin a quest to find out who I was and how I wanted to present that aspect of myself to the world. But at this time I didn't realize this. I knew something wasn't right with me, and I was a kid who grew up in the 80s, or where you were watching almost 100 hours of specifically targeted kids commercials to make you feel inadequate if you were not wearing the latest shade of fluoro green, wearing shoes that you needed to pump up, or listening to the latest compilation album that claimed to be 100% hits. None of my friends seemed to care about any of these things really, although it probably came up in conversations in between which consoles were better, Sega or Nintendo. Still, for some reason, these commercials affected the way I thought. They seemed to be quick fixes to the cracks in myself that I was already beginning to notice. I wasn't like anybody else. I was in this secret panic all the time, pretending that things didn't worry me, but they definitely did. A few times my mother did give in and buy whatever was fashionable at the time, but it was normally some cheap knockoff that was off-brand, by missing valves on a trendy fashion brand, or a strange failed attempt at replicating a logo that looked more like a 3-year-old drew it by applying a crayon to butcher paper, using both fists to hold that crayon. Whatever sparks of self-esteem I thought these clothes would magically grant me was always extinguished the minute someone noticed I was not wearing officially licensed sports brands. This identified me as being poor, and this was to be made fun of. And having the audacity to wear something that was obviously a cheap knockoff. Who was I to try and reach such a level of cool that can only be achieved by winning the life lotto of being raised by wealthy parents who can afford to pay someone else to cut their hair and buy clothes that you wore as long as the fashion trend lasted for? I pretended not to care, and I was lucky with the 90s in its retaliation to such aggressive corporate marketing that fashion went in the complete opposite direction. It was suddenly cool to be alternative, weird, and wearing whatever clothes were laying on your bedroom floor. For this reason, I think I avoided a lot of the pressures of following trends and trying to keep up with whatever was cool at the time. And I decided early that I was just going to try and stay in the middle of whatever was happening and not draw too much attention to myself. I can never be one of those kids who was comfortable with being weird and went all in and developed a personal style of their own. They would still be harassed over it, but we all knew this came from a degree of jealousy that everybody longed to have, that true freedom and confidence to find your own thing and express that part of yourself. Finding this at such a young age was already ahead of the curve, and I wish I learned what the secret was back then. It would have saved me that awkward decade of trying to maintain a personality that tried desperately to appease as many groups as possible. If only I could communicate with my 8-year-old self looking back at his reflection, and to tell him that none of this really matters. Nobody will care, and you will soon leave all these people in your class behind. They will dissolve into distant flashes of memory that are no longer connected to your life and will be miles away from where you eventually began. I think maybe I kind of knew this, and in some ways I was just in a huge hurry to grow up and get this whole adolescent awkward stage thing done with. I knew somewhere there was space and people who were just like me, feeling displaced and trying to maintain the look of someone who follows what everyone else is doing, while deep down they were tired of trying to keep up this facade. I began to pity the kids who were in and out of fashion trends and how mean others were when they didn't realize that last trend was already over and something new and expensive had come along that you needed to buy right away lest you be exposed as the odd one out. There is always going to be people who just don't like you, no matter how you dress yourself up to whatever is normal at the time and place. The more you try to keep up, the more you reek of desperation, and making your exposure of being a fraud ever more likely. The day you grow up is the day you say to yourself, what does this even matter, really? The whole thing was rigged to begin with. It was all a malicious marketing campaign that was cultivated from extensive marketing research and the kind of propaganda techniques you would think would only be used during wartime. The relentless greed of companies who want to empty your pockets and your bank account to make you temporarily plug that gaping hole of your sense of self that was damaged the day you turned on a television and saw unrealistic ideas of beautiful people living glamorous lifestyles that were always going to be out of your reach to the common everyday person, no matter how much money you threw at that corporate machine. Eventually you just have to stop fighting, and hopefully that is not because you run out of money. You just have to be able to look in the mirror and accept this is what you are, and even this is subject to change at any moment. It doesn't matter how you dress it up, you are the result of your own experiences and choices that have kept you alive long enough to reach this moment. You can never be manufactured, reproduced, or sold off as some kind of trending hashtag. This is your story, and you can paint outside the guidelines that were unnecessarily put there. For those who don't really want to think too hard about the what next and what will be tomorrow. Nobody can see tomorrow and how it's going to affect you personally. That will come down to you and where you want to go from here. So that's it for another show. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. If you like the show, want to like and subscribe on the very device you're using right now. Doing this will keep you up to date with the next episode that normally drops on a Monday if I can get it completed. Leaving a review on that device would also help. Leaving some sort of star system would help. But at the very least, just mentioning this to someone, retweeting it or reposting it on Facebook would be very much appreciated. And I would thank you eternally from this moment on. If you want to follow this podcast, you can on Facebook and Twitter just by searching for Tales from the Mind Boat podcast. Doing so will keep you up to date with new episodes and whatever's going on in my life that you might want to know about outside of this podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Nashtopia, and you can also follow my Instagram art diary account at Trav Nash Draws Things. The music for this podcast is composed by Tim Witt. You can listen to his music right now on SoundCloud just by searching for Tim Witt Sounds, or you can buy his albums and pay whatever you feel for some awesomeness at Bandcamp right now just by searching for Tim Witt Sounds. This podcast is written, produced, designed, cut and pasted, and read by me, Trav Nash. You're welcome. All ambient sounds during the episode is also designed by me. I hope you're doing okay. How are you? I hope you have a good week. I hope the sun comes out again. Until next week, stay safe, look after yourself, and as always, peace.